Hello, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. It is the Witty Writers Show Christmas special, and we are so lucky today because we have got two of the most amazing literary agents in the business. We've got Chairman of Trident Media Group and top literary agent Robert Gottlieb. Hello, Robert.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, darling. And I believe you're in somewhere very sunny right now.
Yes, we're on vacation actually,
Oh,
but we're happy to join you.
Oh, well, I'm thrilled and honored to have you on the show, Robert, as always. And we've also got top literary agent Mark Gottlieb from Trident Media.
Hi,
Hello,
thank
Mark.
you. Hi, how are you?
I'm well. I'm so thrilled to have you both on the show because you've come into the book world and the industry at very different eras. And Robert, I mean, you started in the book industry in 1977. And compared to what the big book world and the book business is like now, you must have seen massive changes. What was it like for you when you first went into publishing?
Well, when I started in publishing in the literary department of the William Morris Agency as an assistant, it was a cottage industry. It wasn't a corporate industry. A lot of decisions were made by the editorial department, often without any input from sales or marketing, because they viewed those departments as having to publish what they bought, as opposed to them dictating what editors could buy. And that's the reverse case today. So it was also, in my view, some of the differences are very clear, and some are a little more gray. You had in traditional publishing, because there were no ebooks, you had a lot of space for mid-list authors. Most authors were mid-list authors, and then over the years of a publishing career, they became successful authors. Today, it's quite different than that. The process is quite different because publishers don't really publish in that middle space, which is was very good for authors because it allowed for a lot of creativity and career building. And so, they don't have the same level, I think, of creative middle space authors. They look for authors that are big authors. They're going to make them a lot of money. They're going to have, national platform. They're going to have a lot of sales across, the spectrum of ebooks and hardcovers and mass market and trade paperback. So the business has gotten a lot tougher for people who are creative, and it's gotten a lot tougher for publishers who need creative people in order to organically grow their industry.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? It really has. I mean, I've seen the differences as a reader in the publishing industry. You see books being marketed differently, bookstores being in decline. There's been massive changes. And Mark, when you first started in the publishing world, it must have been about the time when technology was really taking off for you.
Ebooks, were just taking hold. Amazon had, only released a couple of Kindle e-readers at the time, and print was still very big, and publishers had really underestimated, the potential of ebooks. No one really knew where things would go in terms of whether they wanted a single-use device or a multi-use device. And so a lot of publishers really just willingly gave their backlists over to, Amazon and other e-publishers. And then just as I was starting in the industry, it was affecting, the print market in such a way that it was actually causing printing plant closures. And some of the people in the art and production departments at Penguin Books, this is before they merged with Penguin Random House, they were they were kind of worried about, whether print would stay or not. Ultimately, it's pretty much here to stay, but it seemed uncertain because the changes were happening so fast. So no one really saw it coming. People initially thought it was the ebooks were just a means for Amazon to sell its Kindle devices, whereas it actually became something of a meaningful business to sell ebooks.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many platforms now that actually sell, ebooks. I mean, you've got Apple, you've got Barnes and Noble, Amazon. There's so many different platforms now that actually sell ebooks. It's a massive, massive business. And I know one person who did know that it was going to be big, and that was you, Robert, because you straight away saw the market was going to change, and you set up your digital book department.
I think you might be on mute there. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, so there are really two stories, in the ebook space that are the main stories. One is I'm a big proponent of ebooks because they allow for authors to publish, where traditional publishers have such a high bar financially today, especially with their overhead and their expectations. They simply don't buy as many books as they once did.
Yeah.
So the ebook space has allowed authors to grow, their businesses and to be published. Some of the books are wonderful, some are okay. I have an author who writes Southern fiction, contemporary fiction. She makes, it's the last 6 months, she made $1.3 million.
Wow.
So, and she's an original ebook author. She doesn't have a traditional publisher. Now, she wants to move into that space, and so we're working that out. The other thing, of course, is that publishers initially made a bad deal with Amazon where they way underpriced new books that they were publishing. They were publishing them at a higher, hardcover level, price-wise. I think your dog's trying to get into your room, Mark. Hold on one second. Mark, why don't you take over? I'll be right back. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
That's all right. We're dog friendly on this show. Actually, while Robert is checking on the puppy, I'm going to introduce everybody to our new little addition. There we go, everybody. This is our little cockapoo. Actually, we've already got 2 golden doodles, as Mark knows. And I want to call it a cockadoodle because I think having 2 golden doodles and a cockadoodle sounds quite cute. But this is Oliver. Look, he's the cutest little thing, everybody. He is gorgeous. Look,
like a teddy bear.
I know, he's got the cutest little bottom nose. He's absolutely lovely. Oh, you are gorgeous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop some comments up to so we can say hello to everybody who's joining us. Oh my gosh, we got so many people. We've got Carla who's joined us. Hello, Carla. I have to say, Carla is one of the authors of one of the best trilogies I have ever read. I could not put it down. It was brilliant. We've also got Peggy who's joined us, another author. She says hello from Michigan. So hello. We've also got James. He says, good afternoon, gentlemen, and thank you for being here again.
Sure, our pleasure. So would you like me to finish the comment, or you want to move on?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, very good. So what publishers did, which was harmful in my opinion to authors in the early days of Amazon, is they made a deal with Amazon where they could discount an author's book to $9.95 and pay the full retail price for the book that the publisher was losing on each sale, because they wanted to create a market for the Kindle.
So by
what happened to authors as a result of that is consumers then had a built-in expectation that every new book that comes along should be $9.95.
Right. So set a precedent.
Yeah. So that set a precedent, and it's a hard one to get over. because, you know, if you go to a mall, you don't go to the retail store with no sale, right? You go to the one that has a sale.
Exactly.
And, you know, which is normal behavior for a consumer, but that put a lot of pressure on pricing for authors' works. And we all know that the royalty that an author gets is based on the retail price.
Yeah.
So the publishers who engaged in that behavior literally cut authors' incomes by 50% by doing that.
Wow. It's amazing, isn't it? And the trend is carried on, isn't it? Especially now that people are able to self-publish as well, because self-published authors are selling their books at much lower price just to get noticed. So of course that means, you know, published authors are then being forced to lower their prices to compete with the indie authors that are trying to get seen.
Yeah, yeah. And the problem with very low pricing is you can move a lot of books, you know, for $1.99 or for free if you're in that Amazon system. But the problem is, if you want to move on beyond that to mainstream publishing, publishers look at those sales and say, look, you know, sure, they sold 50,000 copies, but were they $1.99? We're not going to be able to do that at, you know, $22.95 or $24.95. So, you know, it's like it's the good part and the bad part, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's a shame because it affects everybody.
It does.
And the unfortunate thing is if the owner of Amazon actually knew the blood, sweat, and tears that went into writing novels and the hours and months and years it takes to actually put your heart and soul into creating, you know, your novel, maybe he wouldn't have been so quick as putting it on for such
I have to tell you, frankly, the way the people at the top of the companies today, another example, Bertelsmann will not, virtually under any circumstance, return the rights to an author for their books, even if the book is doing terribly, because they view it as an asset on the books. So in the days that we were talking about, when Scribner was a standalone company, and you had Dutton, a standalone company, and you had Dial, standalone company, you know, publishers in those companies, if the book wasn't doing well, they would say, sure, we'll return the rights to you, no problem, because they didn't view it as an asset on the books. Now, returning rights is very important. When I represented Dean Koontz, he'd written 30 books that he got the rights back to under the name of Lee Nichols.
Wow.
And when I met with him at his home in California to talk about his next book, he told me about those books. And I said, well, you know, Dean, can you update those books? He said, sure. I sold the entire 30 books to Ballantine for $2 million a book.
Wow.
And I couldn't have done that unless he had gotten the rights back.
Yeah.
But like I say, in those days, publishers, you know, really very much cared about the welfare of authors, and they weren't greedy, and they didn't hold on to things that they shouldn't be holding on to.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? Honestly, your wealth of knowledge blows my mind, I've got to tell you. It's just amazing. It really is. We've got more people joining in, so I'm going to pop them up so we can say hello to them. We've got Scott who's joined us. He says, thank you for this information. Merry Christmas to you, Scott. We've also got Rob Ekno, and he says, hello from Los Angeles. Hello, Rob. Nice to see you. We've also got Brian, who's one of my bestest friends ever in the UK. Hello, Brian. Nice to see you, darling. Happy holidays. We've also got a new viewer called Candy Armstrong. Hello, Candy. And she says, hello from West Virginia. We're getting all over the place now. Honestly, it's great. We've also got, there we go. We've got Jay Zavaris. She says, hello and good afternoon. And she says, too cute about the puppy. I know, he is. He's gorgeous.
Thank you.
My heart was melting when I saw her. She's gorgeous. There we go. Amy says adorable. And
Thank
she's
you.
adorable. How old is she, by the way, Robert?
She's approaching 5 months.
Oh, that's when they get their real little personalities, isn't it? It's so cute.
And Mark found her for me, but they're very hard to find because there aren't a lot of breeders, and they only do 1 litter a year.
Interesting. Oh,
But they are. I have to recommend them. They're like cats. They loved it. Last night, I was sitting on my chair doing work, and my dog is sitting on my lap for an hour sleeping.
Oh, do you know what? I think people underestimate how therapeutic pets are, especially dogs.
Oh,
because
yes,
you've had a stressful day and you've been on the go all day and they want attention. They in a very nice way, they force you to just go, oh.
They're the best medicine, yes.
Oh my gosh. Let's have a look. Oh, James says cute too. And we've also got David McCaffrey who's joined us. He says, good evening, Beth and gentlemen. Good evening, David. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We've got Josephine from the UK. She says hello. And we've also got Jackie Rom. She says hi. And
hello, Jackie. Jackie's a friend of ours.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us, Jackie. We've also got Beth as well. She says, so excited to be here and ripped up by these super smart gentlemen. Thank you, Beth.
Right, that's very kind of you.
Very lovely. And Brian says, evening, my lovely. Oh, he's so sweet. Typical from Portsmouth. Look, I can almost hear his accent as I said that. And we've got Amy from, oh, there we go. She says, hello from Savannah. And let's have a look. Candy says, which is why my picture features my dog. Oh, us dog owners are the best ever. So ladies and gentlemen who have joined us for our live Christmas show, if you've got any questions that you would like to ask Robert or Mark, please put them in the comments and I will pop them up for you. Now, Robert, I wanted to ask you about bookstores because obviously that's one of the biggest things that's been affected in the book industry as well as for us as readers. I mean, when you first went into the business in in 1977, bookstores were everywhere. You couldn't go to a town without having a bookstore.
Well,
has that been heartbreaking for you?
It's been challenging, very challenging for my authors and all authors and Mark's authors. When I went to my first ABA, which is the American Booksellers Convention, that's what it was called in those days, I discovered a writer named Tom Clancy at the Naval Institute Press. And he had written a book called The Hunt for October. It hadn't been published yet. So I was able to secure a set of galleys and reach out to him, and he agreed to become a client of mine. And for 17 years we worked together. He passed away recently, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But the reason The Hunt for October became a New York Times bestseller was specifically because of independent booksellers. It's because the chains at that time would not take a book that was so far afield from their normal, distribution and chain of buying. And so independents were about 25,000 stores at that time. Today, they are under 2,000 stores in America. Now, there is a bit of a resurgence occurring.
Yeah.
Some stores are starting to open again with, COVID having, become less of an issue in the economy. But that goes back to my discussion about mid-list authors. The independent bookstores were the place in the retail market that made a lot of very successful authors because they read the book, they loved the book, they ordered the book. They didn't do it based on their numbers. They did it based on their gut feeling and how much passion they had for the writer's work. And that era, unfortunately, is gone for the most part. Now, there may be a larger resurgence in independents, and independents do buy very differently than the big box stores, the wholesalers, the big chains. They buy very differently. Whereas it's all computerized, in Walmart, Barnes and Noble, Costco. They just look at what the author sold the last book in the in their electronic file system, and then they order to net. They don't even order as many books as the author sold last time. They order to net, which means that they come in at lower numbers, even though the author may have done okay for them. So it's very hard to build a career when you're faced with that. But those are some of the major challenges. That's one reason, and I don't mean to brag, but I'm speaking factually, why it's important to be with a major agency.
Yeah.
Because we're able to our business goes to the bottom line of Bertelsmann. No agency in the world does as much business with Bertelsmann as we do. So when we look at their marketing plans, when we took a look at their media, their publicity plans, we do an analysis of that with our colleagues in the social digital department. We're able to move the needle. An independent agent alone, with virtually no business to speak of, with Bertelsmann, who sells a book there, that agent has to work with the editor, and the editor, is not going to go against company, normalcy, as they, in terms of how they do things, and it's going to be very limited in what the agent's capability is in terms of an analytical response to the marketing, publicity, and promotion plans.
Yeah. It's amazing. It really is. Mark, from your point of view, you've come into the publishing world just as Facebook is kicking off, Instagram's kicked off, TikTok now, all these social media, and I know you're all over social media. It's so impressive how on top of it you all are. It's brilliant. Have you noticed, an increase recently of, the bookstagrammers, people who want to hold physical books and they want to post about it and share it? Is that making a big difference now for you and your clients?
Yeah, I think it goes back to how some of the things have changed, in the bookstore landscape. Just to talk about that for a minute, because I think it leads into this too. I was rewatching that Nora Ephron movie, You've Got Mail, with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. And Meg in the movie is an independent bookstore owner on the Upper West Side. The man she meets helps big chain bookstores like Barnes and Noble. Obviously, it has a different name in the
Fox Books.
Yeah, or something.
It's one of my favorite movies and books.
He helps them open locations, and so I could see that back then. Even then, it was like big fish eats the little one. And today, whereas back then people were claiming that Borders, which is now closed, and Barnes and Noble were like the villains for eating up the business of independent bookstores. Now they're heralded as heroes in the face of Amazon and online book buying. And I think it's just sort of this natural ebb and flow of things. It would be a lot more painful if people weren't reading as much. I think it's more so they're just reading in different ways, getting their books in different ways. And I think independent bookstores are still here, and they're here to stay, because even though people walk into an independent bookstore and they might know they're paying a little bit more for an independent book they're buying there, they're kind of paying to have that experience of walking into a bookstore, seeing books around them. It's being very tactile,
and also having a relationship with the bookseller, themselves, which I enjoy as a book consumer. I love going into an independent bookstore and talking to the manager or the owner about the books I like, and what publishing is like, and so forth. So that relationship is still very wonderful and valuable.
Yeah.
I think it's gratifying to a lot of people, and leading into what you asked about social media and how books are talked about on there. I think previously everything was more so the water cooler effect, or people talking about books in person at book clubs or church events and things like that. And with the advent of social media, people could go online more easily and share what they're reading. So it's not as though people are really doing it. Less of that. In fact, they can do more of it, but in different ways. They can take to TikTok, they can take to Instagram, they can talk about what book they're reading and enjoying.
And you also have celebrity book clubs. Oprah Winfrey, Reese Witherspoon, amongst many, many others.
Yes.
And those are a lot of fun. You hear people's likes and dislikes, and what they're reading, and it's a nice variety of books that they choose. I wish they would do a little more nonfiction as well, but I think that they, their audience is probably by a lot of fiction, and it's a it's very different today than it once was, but it's still about, for the consumer, the reader, it's all about the book. It's always about the book. And I tell publishers that when they start giving people a hard time, and the contracts departments make ridiculous policies, I tell them, then go publish a contract if you're going to give this author a hard time. Go publish a contract. See how much money you make from that.
Yeah,
it's crazy when you talk to them straight about that stuff, because their authors have to live on what they earn. Yeah. If I said to a publisher recently, I said, you get paid bi-weekly. There's a paycheck coming in, your mortgage is going to be paid, your electric bill, your kids' college. I said, authors don't have that kind of security. And so when you enact policies that peel away rights, that make authors pay back money if a publisher, for any reason, used to be an editorial reason, now it's any reason, they can reject a book. So, as an agency, and Mark can talk more about this, we're up against that every day with our authors standing behind us, believing that we're working hard for them and trusting in us, and we appreciate their loyalty and love. But you can only do that if you have a business that really impacts, publishers. So you get their attention and you get them to do things outside of what they traditionally want to do with, independent agents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you agree with that, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need a good agency behind you. It's a challenging marketplace, but we still make it work. I was going to say, Beth, there's some questions I noticed from some people too in the audience. I don't know if you want to save them for later, but I saw beginning with David and some others. There were some questions they had.
They have. Let's put them on right now and try and get as many questions as we can done. Let's have a look. Okay. So Joseph Ara says, as a veteran, I couldn't help but love that book, The Intrigue, with regards to The Hunt for Red October. I love that one. If you can hear me googling, by the way, it's because I'm wearing my Christmas bells. Thought I'd get all Christmassy. Okay, and David says, having received a number of rejections from literary agents when I was starting out as an author, I was wondering if a manuscript is always read, or if you just receive a polite response that your story isn't their cup of tea after a cursory review.
It's hard to say, because this really depends on who is the person on the receiving end of a query letter or a manuscript. We can really only speak to what our experiences are like at Trident and what we tend to ask of our colleagues. We like to get back to people in a timely manner. And in fact, when they submit a submission on our website or a query letter on our website, they get a, receipt sent to them by email that we plan to get back to them within a certain time frame. And usually if a query letter is of interest, the agent will request the manuscript. And I think they would would hope that they, again, I can only speak to our experience, but, do their diligence in reading a query letter, seeing that there's, a good story there, and then looking at the manuscript and reading as far as their interest carries them into the manuscript.
And just quickly, all agents have, their likes and dislikes.
Yes.
As an author, don't stop writing and don't stop trying. There are authors that I've represented over the years who struggled for many, many years and ultimately were published and became successful. So agents, like publishers, have their likes and dislikes and their capabilities and the lack of capability. So it's hard to be rejected, but at the same time, you have to keep writing and keep trying and coming up with new books. I will say that in today's market, in commercial fiction, not literary fiction, but in commercial fiction, the idea for the book is central. If the idea is not one that has resonance, that has an impact, then the likelihood is the agent's not going to ask for the manuscript.
Yeah.
The other thing you have to make sure of when you do have a manuscript you're submitting is make that first third of the book incredible, because that's where you get your main reads, in the first third of the book.
Yeah.
Don't wait for the middle and don't wait for the last, third.
Yeah. And like we've mentioned in our previous shows, it also depends on other things that some authors don't think about. So, if an agent is literally just about to release a story that's of a similar genre, or it's similar type of trope, they might love your story, but it might not be the right time for that agent because they've just picked something up.
And by the way, same for publishers. Just because they publish a book very successfully, a certain genre, category, you go to them with a book that's very much like it, and oftentimes they'll say, it's going to compete with that, the other book, and that we've already done that book and we want some fresh ideas. So it's very hard because authors, will look at what's working in the marketplace and many of them will try to, work the material in such a way to try to look at the trend line. Sometimes that works, but oftentimes, you want to write the book that sets a trend. For instance, Wonder by R.J. Placchio. First novel, turned down all over New York, sold for a handful of dollars. 12 years later, 5 million copies sold in 54 countries published it. Because one publisher saw it and liked it and published it. Yeah. And that's really part of what makes publishing exciting as well, because you never know what you're going to find. You never know what's going to happen.
You don't. And also, I mean, you and Mark, you two are both very unique, really, because you read all your submissions, whereas many literary agents out there rely on their assistants. So you're querying a lot of the times to the literary agent's assistant, not directly to the literary agent. So sometimes it depends on whether their assistant likes your story or not and passes it on to their boss, the literary agent,
or another agent in the company.
Exactly. So there's so many variables, isn't there?
There is. Mark, do you want to speak to that a little?
Yeah, I was going to say, some agents may even look only at, work that's been referred to them. Really, it's an individual thing and it's a subjective thing. I was going to say, shall we look at some of the other comments? There are probably a lot of other questions.
There are. We've got Lisa who's joined us, and she says hello to all. Hello. Okay, so Candy is a new viewer, and she says, how do you get an agent to read your manuscript?
I think you go ahead.
Write a great book.
It's also, I mean, you can have the best.
I was going to turn the light on. Excuse me 1 second.
No worries. You can have the best novel going, can't you? But if you don't sell your story in a query letter,
yes,
then you can sabotage yourself, because it's not just saying, please, can you represent me? I've written this great book. You need to sell your story. You need to have this is from my experience, because I've learned the hard way.
Well, Mark is the genius in understanding the submission email or letter. I mean, I've seen the work he's done and how he explains things to authors, and in these podcasts and chats that he has. So, Mark, why don't you speak to that a little?
Just very quickly, because but basically, I think a good query letter all fits on one page. The hook up front, some comps, and a couple paragraphs detailing, the plot details of the book, And then the last paragraph is best left up to, short author bio of relevant writing experience and credentials. But yeah, that's the tricky thing. You need to not have only written a really good manuscript, but also be able to speak about your work in a concise and really interesting way to, entice us to read the manuscript. So
because in all fairness, we see a lot of material coming in, a lot.
I can't even imagine how much.
And so, you want to give authors, the best shot you can, but it's very helpful when you see a submission letter or email that can really tweak your interest.
I was going to say too, I saw there's a question from AJ that seems like an interesting one.
Yes.
In regard to word count, which kind of it's pertinent to this too.
It is. He says, what is the hard limit minimum for novel word counts? I've heard 50K. I've also heard 80K. Now, this is a bit fluid as well, depending on genre, etc., and other factors as well, isn't it?
There are a lot of considerations that go into that. For instance, I would really say for fiction, the range for commercially viable fiction the sweet spot is really maybe roughly around 80 to 90,000 words. Even with that said, normal book length tends to range between 80 and 100.
And it can be longer for literary works.
Sure. Yeah. But having a shorter book creates some difficulties for the publisher and for the agent in getting it sold, because publishers price their books according to page count, word count, page count.
Because the cost of production and manufacturing.
So a shorter book will result in a lower price tag, which means a smaller margin for profit for the publisher. So in order for them to really make their numbers work, they need to sell a lot of books.
So let's say it's 80 and you come in at 100,000. That's not bad, because you can be edited. You can edit what you need to edit to get to the point where you hit that sweet spot.
Yeah. And Mark, you've had a situation where you had a query for a book. I remember we spoke about it on one of our previous shows, and that you loved the book, but it was ginormous. So you spoke to the author and you managed to sort of separate it into separate books, if I remember rightly.
That's right.
Let me just say, Mark is unique in that respect. A lot of agents, and I'm not, I'm speaking from knowledge, they're lazy. They're lazy. And so, a book comes in like that, it's easy to say no to, not because you got to do a lot of work. So Mark, now back to you.
Yeah, no, I saw the potential in the book, but it was the opposite problem of having a short book. When you have a book that's very far in excess of 120,000 words, the price tag on the book goes up. And what happens with that is, whereas there's a bigger margin for profit, you kind of go outside of a normal price range on a book, and you begin, that old adage, you lose a customer for every dollar a book goes up in price. So that's part of the challenge. And then the publisher's cost of shipping, warehousing, manufacturing goes up. And it also makes it a little more difficult to record in audio, longer studio hours.
But Mark, you've done a lot, but you do a lot of editorial work with your authors.
Well, right. So with that book, what we did was, that was an 800,000 word manuscript, and it was an epic fantasy. And I had to say to the author, there could be 6 or 8 books here. And so we chopped it up actually into 3 books, and we pared it down, which is, believe it or not, it's much easier to shave muscle off of bone than it is to add muscle to bone in most cases. So we were able to do it in that instance. But you're right, most people would get a submission. They would see it was an outrageous word count, and a lot of people would reject it on their basis.
They reject it. They would reject it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why the email with the description.
1 moment.
That's why the email with the description of the book and the presentation, it's very important, because you want to be able to convince that agent that this is worth looking at and taking on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mark will be back in a minute. I think something happened with his phone.
No worries. I'm going to give you another question, Robert, if that's all right.
Sure.
So Peggy says, do you read past the query letter? And I can understand her why she asked this, because some agents don't read the query letter, go straight to the manuscript. Other agents read the query letter first and then decide to read the manuscript. So there are lots of different agents who do different things. So would you read past the query letter? And what would
if the query letter convinced me that I should read the book? I can't read. It's impossible for any agent or company to read every book that comes in on submission.
Yes.
So you do have to pick and choose. Now, every agent has her likes and dislikes. We have Ellen Levine, who represents Marlon James. She represents Michael Ondaatje, who wrote The English Patient, Russell Banks. So she has very specific tastes and likes. And so if someone submitted to her a commercial novel, the likelihood is she wouldn't read past the submission letter.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the agent's interests and tastes.
And I think also, and especially this is important for our new viewers, what a lot of authors, and we've touched on this before, Mark, haven't we? Your query letter is your first impression. So if your query letter isn't as spot on as your novel, you could really sabotage yourself. So just by doing grammatical errors or, not sounding professional and yet intriguing, you have to be really, really thorough with your query letter because.
Yes. And my suggestion is, don't make it a buddy query letter. I get those and, I'm very turned off by it because I'm a professional. I treat people always professionally with respect. And I like to get a letter, a submission that is of a professional standard. And then I can make it better, and it's better for the author because I'll pay more attention to it. And I will also, be more likely to be intrigued by it.
Yeah, I mean, it sets the right impression, doesn't it, Mark? If you get a query letter, and as Robert said, it sounds professional, it's intriguing, it's got no errors, that's going to give you a great impression of that author and what that author could possibly be like to work with.
Yeah, it's our first insight into the book. I always liken it to going to the restaurant. The waiter tells you what's on the menu. A really good waiter, when they're sharing the specials, they describe the food to you. They entice you to order the dish. A waiter who is not that good a salesperson would probably just simply tell you what the specials are, not describe them, and then you don't feel so compelled to order whatever the specials are. So, yeah, it's important. It's kind of like, or even a painting in a museum. On the right-hand side, there's a paragraph that describes what the painting is about. That being well written helps us understand what the work is about. I saw some other questions here too from Jay-Z and others.
We're getting lots. I'm going to do a quick fire session if that's all right, because we're getting close to an hour. It goes so quick, it's ridiculous. There we go. So we've got a question for you now. It says, independent bookstore owners and employees tend to be more knowledgeable about authors, genres, and so on. Plus, they are so much fun. I would agree with that.
That's completely accurate, truthful, factual. And I'm all for it because I want the people who are selling my author's books to the public to love them, to enjoy them, to have read them, and really, at the bottom line, care about them.
Exactly. And I've got to say, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I am a certified book sniffer-aholic. I love the smell of a new book. It's like opening a fresh tin of coffee, isn't it?
Yes.
Smell from a new book. I love it. You can't get that with a Kindle. I'm just saying.
No.
So Candy says, what will catch their eye in a query letter?
Two things. I think it's very simple if you boil it down. One, a well-written query letter, because that's our first insight into what the quality of the writing in the manuscript might be like. And then two, the meat and potatoes of the story. It's got to sound like a really great concept or an exciting plot, that is, basically what the story is about and how well written it is. That's what I think convinces people to read past the query letter.
Yeah. And sometimes a great hook can be enough to really spark an interest. I mean, I always say to my clients, look at movie trailers, see what movie trailers are like, because each movie trailer, for example, Avatar, they always have such a great hook and then draw you in.
The other thing about querying an agent is, and this is up to each individual author, is if you submit to Trident your book and you say to the agent, I'm submitting this simultaneously to other agents, oftentimes an agent at Trident will pass on the book because there's only so much time for us to read new authors and new authors' queries and represent debut authors. And if you read the book and you love the book and you want to represent it, but then 3 other agents are offering representation for the book, and because his agent interest doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a big book or it's going to be a big advance. It just means that they like the writer, they think the book has potential. But when Trident reads a book, we put a lot of time into what we're doing. We don't, for instance, we may show it to our foreign rights department. We want to find out if the book has potential for international sales. Most publishers, agents we deal with, don't have a foreign rights department other than one agent who works with sub-agents around the world. We sell direct around the world in major markets. So oftentimes we'll talk to the foreign rights department, we'll talk to the social media department. So a lot of work and time goes into the evaluation. And if we do all that and the book, we end up losing the book to, an independent agent somewhere, it's not a good use of our time.
That's it. I mean, it's time is money, isn't it? And you've got such limited time per day to get through as many as possible. I can't even imagine your workload. I really, really can't. It blows my mind. Let's have a look. Let's see if we've got some more comments. Okay. Okay, she says, how weird is it that an author can move more signed copies yet can barely move their ebooks online?
It depends.
Yeah,
I think that's an individual experience, right?
Yeah.
Some people can do very well online given how they market and promote their books. Like, for instance, with the Witty Writers Show, I see the show pops up on Spotify and other podcast places and YouTube and various social media channels. But if we were just doing this one place in person, it wouldn't have the same kind of reach. And then perhaps it depends on the author and the book, but some people maybe do better in an in-person setting, and can appeal to people on a more personal level in hand selling their book than they do online. So it's maybe more of an individual thing.
Yeah. And on the plus side, you do tend to earn more on paperbacks and hard copies. So I would say that's a success. To be honest with you, I'll be like, yes. Okay. Anna says, very interesting. So she's loving our conversation. And we've got Candy with a question. What genres are you gentlemen interested in? Or what genre is hot right now? That's a very good question.
Well, for me, I'm interested. I do primarily commercial fiction with some upmarket nonfiction, but not a lot. I've always had great success in the commercial fiction arena, representing at times Janet Ivanovich, Dean Koontz, Tom Clancy, Catherine Coulter, and others. But I have one really fantastic spiritual and health writer named Deepak Chopra, which we've been together for 30 years, and we're great friends, and we love working together. So that's primarily my interest. I also like, upmarket history, but primarily commercial fiction. I think Mark has actually a more eclectic list than I do.
I must admit, I've seen your roster, and wow, it's very impressive, Mark.
There's a big range there. I figured, whereas I think a lot of agents want to come to be known as, okay, that's the de facto agent I go to if I wrote a science fiction book or a women's fiction book. I figured authors would come to know me by my brand of representation and varied interests. So I've worked across fiction, nonfiction, children's books, graphic novels, and usually upmarket fiction and more so platform driven fiction. Some books with some commercial sensibility to them. But that's kind of the only unifying theme among them. I don't really like to limit myself. If I see promise in a work and if it's of interest, I like to work with the author. So I just keep a very open mind.
If it's a good book, it's a good book.
Correct.
Exactly. That's the best way to be. Best way to be. Okay, so we've got Claire who's joined us. Claire says, so lovely to hear from you all. This is super helpful to hear. Oh, there we go.
Our pleasure.
I love comments like that. Honestly, you guys make such a big difference to so many people. You really do. Let's have a look. So Amy says, what are a few writers' conferences you can all recommend for yet to be published authors? And Mark and Robert, do you go to writers' conferences and how often?
So there are a lot of good conferences and workshops, but since the questions is about conferences, I think some of the biggest known ones are there's the Writers Digest conference in New York. There's also on the West Coast, there's the San Francisco Writers Conference. And then in the Midwest, a really good one, I would say, is the Writers League of Texas as conferences. I used to go to a lot of conferences. It was those, I would go to 1 or 2 a month. And then I think it's just very easy to get tired in doing something like that. And sometimes something comes about that's good once in a while from that. But attending the conferences, it's a lot more about networking, getting to know the industry better. From our standpoint, it's probably more so about giving back and like here on this podcast, sharing knowledge and information. Where I've found, it to be more worthwhile to devote attention is like a lot of our colleagues attend very prestigious writers workshops like the Iowa Writers Workshop. There's Breadloaf. I've been to NYU has a creative writing workshop, and then every year I go to the Yale Writers Workshop because my client Jothan Borello is the director of that workshop. So you have, and they don't. It's not like for instance at the New York Pitch Fest at Writers Digest. It's like a bell rings every 5 minutes and someone sits in front of you and it's like speed dating. And by the end of the day,
the Maui Writers Conference is very similar, where you sit in a room just pitching ideas at you, and it's I don't love that. I'd rather get a lovely query letter and be able to think about it and digest it in time, and not have 3 minutes. It's like speed dating an author. I mean, it's where these people come up with these ideas are amazing to me.
It's probably really good for the writers to be practicing their pitching in that way, but I think by the end of the day, as an agent, you need an Advil, and so. But with these workshops, like for instance, at the Yale Writers Workshop, they'll only put maybe 5 people in front of you, and those are writers who the workshop feels that they themselves feel those writers are ready to go before an agent.
That's amazing. I suppose it's basically just my favorite word, researching. It's just researching what sort of thing would be most suitable for your genre, what type of thing you write, your comfort level. Again, it's all down to variables, isn't it? But as you said,
something, it's very unpredictable. Some people will say, read what's working, try to find a way in. But then again, a lot of books that are written aren't about what's working and are unexpected, and it's part of the creative process, which makes working with writers very, very interesting and enjoyable. But there in the like the Wharton Business School, you'll learn that these are the systems, these are the way things work, these are what if you do this, you can expect that. But with authors and publishing and writing and creativity, you can throw all that out the window. That's why, by the way, I can tell you in my career in my management positions, I've never hired anyone from an Ivy League school.
Yeah.
Because they are too fixed in their wheelhouses, having gone through school in a certain way with certain expectations, a certain process built in. It's not to say that they're not smart people, good people, and well educated, but our industry on the agent side really requires kind of a unique thinker and personality that schools simply don't teach you. That's one reason that William Morris was so successful over the years, because of the training program.
Yeah, I think they should. I think more companies should do that. I think they should bring back apprenticeships. It was much more useful.
I started as a secretary, not an assistant, and I worked my way up to the board of directors. But and I tried, most of the agents that are Trident are organic people who have come up through the system that we've trained in the Trident way, with Trident responsibilities. And we've gotten some very good results. We have Alexa Stark, who's one of the finest young agents in the industry for mostly literary fiction. And early on in her career, many of her clients became New York Times hardcover bestsellers. But she was an assistant at Trident, working for Ellen Levine for 4 or 5 years before she got her shot.
Wow. It's just amazing. It really is. I've got one more question for you before we finish. And for those of you who have asked questions, but we haven't answered yet, don't worry. Because if I can talk Mark and Robert coming back on the show, I can make a list of them and we can get them next time. So don't panic if we haven't answered you yet. But Jane asks, how well do UK authors' books work in the US? That is an awesome question. Mark, you first.
Well, I think a good example is that you could look at J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter. She's a UK author. If Harry Potter had only published primarily in the UK, that's a sliver of the English language book market compared to the English language in the US and then throughout the world. The bulk of readers in the English language tend to be in the US, I think, in part because book publishing is primarily situated in New York. I mean, there are publishers throughout the world, but really primarily in New York, the same way that Hollywood for the film and TV.
Let me just jump in, Mark. It also depends on the genre / category of the book. So commercial fiction travels back and forth between the two countries very well, except for summer fiction in Charleston. I mean, that's not going to be attractive to the British, and vacationing in Plymouth is not going to be attractive to Americans. But by and large, it's kind of like the film industry. Our film industry travels around the world, so as do books from the United States. And there are many wonderful. Frederick Forsyth, one of the great thriller writers of the 20th century. And I'm not the Day of the Jackal author. I'm thinking of his name is Forsyth, I think. But literary fiction travels very well between the UK and the US. High level literary fiction. Marlon James, who wrote The Seven Killings, the murder of Morley, is published in over 50 countries and very successfully UK #1 London Times bestselling author. But it's high literary fiction.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? It really is. We are sadly we have run out of time. I swear I could literally talk to you both for hours because you're so knowledgeable and fascinating.
Well, let me just say in ending, it's a blessing to work with authors. It's a wonderful career. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in working and living with authors. And every book is a gateway into a new world.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. I love it. Thank you so much, Robert and Mark, for joining us today for our Christmas special.
Our pleasure. Merry
both.
Christmas and have a Happy New Year.
Thank you, darling. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And hopefully we'll be able to get them both back on soon.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
I might have to bribe them with some mince pies from England.
Oh, you're talking my language.
Happy holidays to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you again for the next Witty Writers Show. But happy holidays, everybody. And I will be making notes of all your questions. So have a great time. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And we'll see you soon on the next Witty Writers Show.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now, everyone.
Bye-bye.